The feather has a unique anatomy, and this is very different. This is one of the really key differences in birds. This is designed for insulation, it's designed to help them fly. There's all these different types of feathering. Here, this particular feather is a flight feather, and we can tell that by the shape of the feather. This here is the vane, and this is a leading vane. This here is the trailing vane. And just this shape like a propeller is what allows the bird to give flight or take flight. So when a bird sort of flies, it'll use this wing and this feather and this motion, and when it's all feathers are working together, that creates lift from this trailing vane. So the anatomy of the feather here is you have this central cord called the calamus. You have this vane here, which is the trailing vane, as I've mentioned, and the vane is made up of all these sections called barbs, which are all linked together by tiny little hooks called barbules, and it creates this kind of solid appearance. As the bird grooms, it can split open, so as the feathers get ratty, they become more and more difficult to keep. And what the bird does is it just grooms these feathers and rejoins it all. When a feather grows, it grows out of a feather follicle. So birds don't have hair as such. The feather is like a modified hair. So it has a blood supply. So you can see here at the moment it's hollow. So when it first grows, it has a blood supply. It grows out of the follicle surrounded by a sheath, and the blood supply goes up the feather as the feather develops. When the feather starts coming out of the sheath, it looks like a little paintbrush. As it gets longer and longer, the blood supply shrinks back into the follicle. And the feather becomes sort of a kind of like a dead tissue, kind of like hair. So there's going to be no feeling in it as the feather kind of starts opening up. So a blood feather is a term which many people hear about. That's actually a young feather that still has blood supply going up that central area here. So it's important when you're wing clipping or doing anything to birds not to damage these blood feathers. They're very delicate, often very soft, as they're still growing, and you can get a fair bit of bleeding as a result of those feathers being damaged. It's interesting to see that inside these feathers, if you cut them open, it's like almost the inside of a bamboo. You'll see all these little kind of chambers walled off, and that's developed as the blood supply gradually shrinks back into the feather follicle. You won't get a new feather until the old feather comes out. If you pluck a feather, and sometimes if a feather's been severely damaged or if there's a lot of bleeding, we might, as a medical procedure, pluck a feather. You always need to be very careful to do that. It should be done under veterinary supervision if you've got a damaged feather. Your new feather will start growing almost immediately. But while the feather is still in the follicle, you won't get a new feather growing. The new feather will grow when the old feather falls out, which happens in most species once a year at molting time. And that's when the feathers are replenished and renewed. So if a feather has been damaged any time after molting and before the next molt, that will stay like that until it's molted. So you can get understanding of what's happened to that bird across the year by looking at the feather. So changes in feathers can occur with nutritional problems, and you can see nutritional problems as the feather grows. Some of those problems can be corrected. So if you've got very dull and poor quality feathers, even though the feather doesn't have that blood supply in it anymore, sometimes with the change of feathers, you'll get a real glossening and a renewing of colour of feathers. That's probably a result of improved nutrition to, say, the preening gland. So when the birds preen, they have a little preening gland just near their tail base, and that provides nutrition to the feather and improves the quality of the feather. So there's things like vitamin D and oils and things in the preening gland, which helps maintain these feathers across the course of the year. Many species, or most species, actually have a preening gland. Some don't, but most species have this preening gland to help them maintain their feathers. And that's definitely affected by nutrition. So feathers are a good hallmark for nutritional disease. behavioural disease, and things like the way we keep our birds, so poor husbandry can be shown up or can show up in poor quality feathers. Sometimes I see very oily or greasy looking birds, and this can be for a number of different reasons. Maybe we've got too much fat in the diet, so very high seed diets where the bird is starting to develop fatty liver disease may result in excess oils starting to come out in their skin. Other reasons for very greasy feathers and oily feathers may be from cosmetics or makeup or hand cream you might be using. So you always got to be very careful of any sort of product we may put on ourselves, particularly if the bird is getting close to us and snuggling up to us, or we're doing a lot of petting. If we have oily substances and stuff on our fingers or our hands or on our face and the bird cuddles up to us, that will rub off onto our birds and can cause significant feather damage. Oil on the birds can be irritant, and then they will chew them and scratch them. That in itself can make them sick, or it can cause skin problems or issues where the bird's scratching and rubbing and damaging its own feathers and over grooming. Sometimes I see it with high fruit diets. I've seen some birds with some horrible sort of feathering as a result of high fruit diets. It used to be a problem when feeding eckies. A lot of people seem to think that they require a high fruit content in their diet, and I've seen some eckies come in looking very wet and greasy looking as well. So it's not just fatty foods that can give them that look. It might be sort of too high a fruit in their diet as well. So even if you're feeding a natural diet, it can still be unbalanced. So it's important to constantly reassess how the bird is eating, what sort of food it's eating, and what sort of food we're actually offering them. And that can be seen in their feather quality and their feather condition. Some species of birds, because they're raised or their natural environment is one of high humidity, sometimes there is value in providing facilities for misting their environment. Some birds will love going into the shower, and often that will create some humidity that they will enjoy and help them groom their feathers. Some birds will prefer that rather than actually bathing, so just having the opportunity for high humidity can help the birds nourish and repair feather damage. Feathers will, once they've grown and been damaged, they'll remain damaged until the molt. So if you have had feather damage and it's just not going away, as long as it's not getting any worse, you may not see an improvement until the molt. So you may just have to wait until the bird has molted.